today's video, the Bearded Butchers are going to tackle a big debate in the beef industry: grass-fed beef versus grain-fed beef. We did this video nearly 5 years ago. It's time for a refresher. Let's check in on what's changed, what the differences are, and the economics of it all. So we've chosen a half of 100% grass-fed beef and a half of a grain-fed beef. And we want to show you what difference we find with the marbling, with the aesthetics, and then the economics of it all. So we have the live weight, the hanging weight. We're going to weigh these carcasses after they age in the cooler, and we're going to do a full yield from each half. And at the end of the day, we'll know a lot more about grain-fed versus grass-fed. So whether you're a steak lover, a hippie, or just curious, this video is going to have something for you.
You heard it. It's diagram video time. You've seen the grain-fed beef diagram. You've seen the bison, the pig, the deer. But what you haven't seen is a side-by-side comparison of grain-fed versus grass-fed. This one's going to be fun. It's going to be very detailed. We're even going to be doing some cooking at the end to try some of these. So lock in, pop the popcorn, grab your soda. Let's go.
The grain-fed beef live weight was 1,185 pounds. That resulted in a hanging carcass weight, a hot carcass weight of 678 pounds. So if we divide those numbers in half, we're looking at 592.5 pounds live weight transferred to this half, and 339 pounds hanging weight for the grain-fed. So now we're going to weigh it after it's aged in the cooler. We're going to have some evaporation loss. That dry aging process is really important because it allows some of the moisture to evaporate, allows some enzymes to break down, makes it a more flavorful, tender carcass. So we're going to weigh it after the dry aging, get it set out on the table, tape it up, and do the same thing with the grass-fed. Okay, on to the grass-fed. We purposely chose the smallest grain-fed beef that we could get a hold of, simply because we wanted this to be close in size. Typically, the grain-fed beef are even larger. They usually break through that 1,200 pound live weight, sometimes up towards 1,500 pounds. And then grass-fed beef are almost always smaller. So this is more average for the grass-fed beef. This grass-fed beef weighed 1,115 pounds live, and it dressed out to 604 pounds hanging. So that translates to the half. The live weight would have been 557.5, and the hanging weight is 302. So let's get this one across the scale, see what we lost in the cooler. So we weighed them out. Our grain-fed was 333 pounds. Started out hot carcass weight of 339 pounds, 6 pound loss, 2%. Our grass-fed, 302 pounds, went down to 288, 14 pound loss, which is 4.8%. My theory is that with the less fat cover, there's more evaporation loss on the grass-fed. We see this in game animals as well, and you can see here there's less fat cover. One other thing to note, from live weight to hanging, or to hot carcass hanging weight, the yield was 57% on the grain-fed and just 54% on the grass-fed. My theory there is grass-fed carry a lot more in the ruminant because they've got all that forage in there, and I think that's a little bit bigger impact from the slaughter step to the carcass step. So let's get them through the cutting process, get everything laid out, see what we're left with as a full cutout and yield.
Now it's time for the fun part. So we're going to take grass-fed hind, grain-fed hind, push those back in the cooler, and we're going to take a grain-fed front, grass-fed front. We're going to get those cut first and get them laid out on our table.
So some of the big advantages of grain-fed cattle over grass-fed cattle. Number one, grain-fed is done on an industrial scale. Typically corn, but often barley or oats are fed. They're high energy source, so the cattle are going to grow much faster, and you don't need nearly as much land or space to do that. Typically, all cattle start out nursing from their mother after they're weaned. Grain-fed cattle eat both a forage diet and a grain diet, and that allows them to finish to market weight in as short as 12 months, often between 12 and 15 months. So the other thing about this is the economy of it all. So you get a much more efficient way of feeding the animal. So it grows faster, it's cheaper to grow them, and you get more fat deposited into the meat and onto the carcass, so it's juicier. Those are really the big advantages to grain-fed over grass-fed. You're gonna see the marbling difference when we lay these out on the table. Now, what you might also see is that in just the 5 years since we did this last video, there's been some changes to how we cut, some subtle changes, but that's something that we're always trying to do here at White Feather Meats, is evolve with what the customer needs are and what the customer wants. So a certain customer wants a juicy, tender, cheaper steak. They typically choose the grain-fed. And if somebody wants the healthier option, typically it's going to be a premium price point, and then they choose the grass-fed. But either way, we have to change our cutting styles a little bit based on the times and the seasons.
So we're just going to go down through the grain-fed front, the grass-fed front, and to just get started. This isn't really going to be a how-to cut as much as it is going to be just an overall education on the two types of cattle and then the yield. So as we go through here, I'm going to be pulling pieces off. We're going to be setting them over on this table like we've done in the previous diagram videos. And then once everything's cut, looks nice and fancy, it'll go over to the diagram table. And in the meantime, Sean's going to be over here. He's going to be doing the trimming. We're going to be separating the fat, the scraps, the bones, which those are all going to get weighed too. Grain-fed beef rib section. There's your brisket, front shank, beef chuck, beef soup bones. This is your beef brisket. Gotta remove this sternum bone out of here. There's a Packer style grain-fed beef brisket. Fat cap, little patty whack action. We'll get the back ribs off of this. Let's cut some gorgeous beef ribeyes. See that nice marbling in those. So this is what we're going to be throwing on the grill later, and we'll do a comparison, grain-fed versus grass-fed ribeye steaks. I know I've mentioned it before, but man, the last two steaks in that section, those are my favorite. So we have a whole stack of grain-fed beef ribeyes headed to the table. Let's get some chuck ribs out of this arm portion. These are typically 4 ribs long. So those real nice chuck ribs, that nice marbling in there. If you're gonna be doing some barbecuing, those are the ones. Just cutting some beef arm roasts. We have 2 that are have the round bone in them, and 3 boneless. Beef plate ribs. Typically we save the 6th, 7th, and 8th rib. Gonna trim these down just a little bit. Just a little bit of this cover off here. And there you have a set of beef plate ribs for the smoker.
All right, I'm gonna break down the chuck here. So as they say, fat is flavor, which is one of the biggest differences with the grain fed. Specifically, this chuck portion gets a lot deposited into it, as you saw the ribeye steaks. This being the next door neighbor. The chuck's gonna give us our flat iron, some boneless chuck eye roasts, and some chuck eye steaks, as well as we'll cut a little stew meat. And that's really one of the biggest things with grain fed, is that rich energy source, or their feed, allows them to deposit, allows them to grow quicker, but allows them to deposit fat a lot quicker and easier. Off of the top of this blade right here, we've got what we call the flat iron, the top blade steak. This is something that 15 years ago we didn't even cut. We cut a bone-in blade roast, and that was a small portion of that roast that we just assumed you would put in your crock pot. We didn't even pull it and cut it as a steak. I think in our area, one of the ways that steak became popular was TGI Fridays. The restaurant chain began serving it. They actually cut it across this way, and it had a gristle strip right in the center. And we then learned to cut it long ways and take that gristle strip out. Now I'm just pulling this blade out of here. We do have this underblade steak. We haven't had a lot of popularity with this, so we just turn it into a nice lean stir fry. Then we're going to pull our chuck eye. This is something that we can get a couple of nice roasts, and off this end right here where it's married to the ribeye, we can get some really nice chuck eye steaks, full of flavor and about half the price per pound as a ribeye steak. There's our chuck roll. We can either do a Denver steak, see all that nice marbling right there, or we can do some ribs out of what's left here on our chuck. So 3 cuts left here. Mock tender, that's again something we're gonna turn into some nice stew or stir fry, our flat iron, and then our chuck roll.
So now I'm just gonna, he mentioned the Denver steak or ribs. We're gonna pull this chunk off the top. We'll cut a nice Denver steak. All that beautiful marbling in there. Takes a little bit of this gristle and cover fat off the top. There you have just a tasty, tasty steak called beef Denver. Let's cut just maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 chuck eyes off of this, and then we'll do a couple nice roasts. So we're gonna start at this end where it meets the ribeye section, and just cut a couple nice chuck eye steaks. So there's some nice chuck eyes. And we'll just do a couple roasts. Now for that beef flat iron, take that entire top blade steak and dissect this down, removing the gristle strip out of the center and off the top and bottom. Once we get that done, find that seam. There's one. Beef flat irons.
So 3 things are happening on this table. We're separating gristle, bone from muscle. So we have the trimmings that can be made into any type of ground product. We have fat, which is tallow. We have bones, and then we have some scraps. Some of these scraps have glands and the real thick, the yellow patty whack we call it. That's just simply gonna have to be thrown away. Some of the scraps, like the bloody neck meat and stuff, we'll grind up into pet food. And then we're also doing some stew and stir fry. So this is the trimmings table. And this is basically what happens with everything when it's not made into a retail ready cut.
I'm sure you guys have seen Stacy. Stacy is my little sister. She's also Scott's twin sister. However, she's Scott's big sister. So Scott's the baby of, no, like older sister.
She's
So,
also my sister.
and Sean.
Oh yes, come here.
He loves hugs.
That makes Scott the baby of the family.
We weighed out all the cuts, all the trimming, all the fat, all the scrap, and now it's time to start laying it out. We'll lay out the first front and just keep going through this entire beef.
We're the Bearded Butchers, and we're here to tell you about our mission statement. And that mission statement is all about elevating the meat experience.
That's right, and we do this for 3 different ways. One, through our authentic butcher shop white feather meats. This is where we spent 30 plus years learning all the butchering skills that we have, from livestock slaughter through further processing, including formulating and blending recipes that are clean spices. After all, butchering and spices have gone together for centuries. That's where we've learned the trade. That's where we've formulated all of our spice blends. Number 2, it's about our online platforms, beardedbutchers.com, Amazon, and our retail partners, where you can find products just like this. These are products that are near and dear to our hearts. They're the spice blends and the items that you need for processing your meat at home. There, as well as the tools that you'll need to do that, and some of the meat products that we produce and we know that you'll love. Outside of that, we have some lifestyle items, including the apparel that we wear. So these are all ways that you too can elevate the meat experience by going to these marketplaces or visiting a retail partner near you. And then number 3, it's about our extensive online library, mostly found here on YouTube, of how-to videos for the butchering, the barbecuing, the grilling. So on YouTube and these other social platforms, you can find this free open source library of videos that we do, leveraging all of those experiences that we've had over these 3 decades of butchering. So that's how the Bearded Butchers are elevating the meat experience.
So head over to all of our social platforms right here on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, where you too can learn how to create and develop some amazing recipes, some amazing food, because at the end of the day, it's all about elevating your meat experience. So Scott's laying out the grain-fed front on the table. While he's doing that, I'm gonna get started on the grass-fed front. So the biggest thing you're going to notice while we go through this is the marbling and just the overall color of the grass-fed versus the grain-fed. So I am going to be doing just a couple things different on the grass-fed beef, mainly because grain-fed is more desired by someone that's going to be barbecuing with it, like you're smoking your beef ribs and things like that, just because it has a higher marbling. It's not that you can't smoke grass-fed ribs and things, it's just that our customers that come in the store prefer the grain-fed over the grass-fed for those purposes. So I'm going to be cutting these into short ribs instead of saving the big ribs for barbecuing.
Okay, grass-fed advantages. So it takes longer, it takes more land to raise a grass-fed beef. And really at the end of it, you're still just left with one beef, which means it's more resources typically to put into raising a beef. And the time is typically almost twice as long. So you're looking for about 24 to 28 months time to finish a grass-fed beef from basically birth till it's time ready for market. And that just means that you're going to have that animal a lot longer, and you're going to need a lot more land for it to forage on. So in order to do a beef that's 100% grass-fed and grass-finished, which these are, you need to not only have a lot of land, but you also need to be able to manage all those land resources, because the type of grass and the quality of the grass is really important, and depending on where you're at in the country, you may actually have to do stored grasses that you can feed in the winter. Otherwise, the grass will be not growing during the winter time. The cattle won't have enough energy and they'll lose weight. So there's a huge management expenditure on the part of the farmer to make sure he has the correct resources to grass feed and grass finish an animal. Now, nearly all cattle start out as grass fed. On the industrial scale, These feeder cattle run on ranges in the West, and that's all they eat is grass until they reach a weight of like, say, 700 pounds. Then they're all gathered up in semis and taken to the feedlots where we can start pushing the high energy grains to them. Now in the case of the grass-fed, it's obviously going to stay on the range, and it's got to get to full market ready status on grass alone. So a lot more resources. Now grass-fed is typically more yellow. That's the beta-carotene in the vegetables itself, or the vegetation itself, that shows up in the color of the carcass. It's also more nutrient dense. So what you're eating is going to have a higher nutrient value. It's going to be lower in calories, lower in fat. And there's also the carbon side of things. So there are now farms that are working to in the grass-fed arena to ensure that they're testing and that they're coming out as carbon neutral. So you can no longer have the argument that cow farts are hurting the planet, at least not from these carbon neutral grass-fed farms. So that's your big overview. As a result, you're going to pay more for grass-fed beef. Now, it might not seem like you have to pay more when grass is essentially free, but that's not how it works. It takes more energy, it takes more time, and it takes more management to produce an animal on grass alone. Therefore, it's a premium price. And the farmer has less weight that he sells at market. So that's what drives the price of grass-fed up over grain-fed.
Some boneless grass-fed chuck roast. Grass-fed beef flat irons. Gonna do the same thing that you saw us do with the grain-fed. Some grass-fed beef flat irons. Something I am going to do a little bit different with this grass-fed than I did on the grain-fed is on the grain-fed I saved a Denver steak, and on the grass-fed I'm just going to cut this into a short rib. It doesn't have as much marbling that the grain-fed did, so rather than cut it into a steak, I'm just going to cut a set of nice beef short ribs. So that'll make somebody a nice set of short ribs they can put into a crock pot or however they want to fix them. Maybe put them in some with some noodles and some gravy and make some braised short ribs. So a little trick for you. I did put this grass-fed beef ribeye section in the freezer just to tighten it up a little bit. Makes it a lot easier to cut. You can keep your steaks more uniform. So when it's leaner, it's just not as sturdy as what, you know, like the grain-fed would be. So it's really hard to keep a uniform cut when it's not as sturdy. So put it in the freezer, and then you can cut these a lot easier. There's your grass-fed beef ribeye steak. Time for the hinds. Grain-fed, grass-fed. So same as you saw us do the fronts, we're gonna do the hinds, starting with the grain-fed first. So as mentioned, this isn't really a how-to video. So if you're noticing, we're not going into, really into depth on a lot of these cuts on how we fabricate them. We do have videos right here on YouTube where you can watch us do detailed cutouts of all of these different cuts. Obviously today's video, the intentions are to educate you more on just the comparison between the grass-fed and the grain-fed, and then of course the yield. So if you're wondering why we're kind of just breezing through these cuts without a lot of explanation, that's why. This is the beef flank. There's the flank. So something that we're going to be doing on both of these hinds is we're going to be cutting caveman steaks. So that does require that I break this down a little bit different than I typically would, because normally I'd pull the tri-tip off, I'd pull the round tip out, and then we would break it down from there. But in order to cut cavemans, I have to pull the tri-tip off and then leave the round tip on here. So you're going to see me cut it just a little bit different than maybe what you've seen me do previously in our videos. This is that beef tri-tip. Just remove this cover fat off of here. And there you have a whole beef tri-tip. So something that's going to be very noticeable from the grain-fed to the grass-fed is that chunk of suet. So you can see that the size of the chunk off the grain-fed, and then here is the piece off the grass-fed. So I'll get that pulled out, but noticeable different in size and I'm sure weight on that grain-fed. So to cut these caveman steaks, we just go right at that ball joint, right below that round tip roast. And then I grab my handsaw. So we are going to be cutting a beef Thor's hammer as well out of this beef hind shank. Let's pull this beef tenderloin out. So we're making these cuts all boneless. So what that means is we're going to be doing fillet and strip and boneless sirloin. If we left the bones in these, they would be bone-in sirloin and porterhouse and T-bone. But we're doing boneless. So there's your whole beef tenderloin that we still need to trim up. Break the sirloin off of here. This is your sirloin. Should move this hip bone off of here. Let's do a little bit of trimming before we start cutting the steaks. There's your boneless sirloin. Let's trim out this beef tenderloin. We're going to remove this chain. We're just going to prep it for some fillets. Get rid of a little bit of that heavy fat. And then we'll remove this silver skin right here on the top. Now we're ready for some fillets. We're prepping the strip section for some strip steaks. So I'm just going down through and making all of these different primals boneless and ready to cut into steaks. There's your strip. So you have strip, tenderloin, sirloin. Beef strip steaks. Those are some nice ones. Look at that marbling in there. There's your grain-fed beef strip steaks. These are some sirloin steaks. We leave the cap on these, which is the picanha, and most of that's just because in our neck of the woods, picanha is not super popular, so it's preferred to just leave it on the boneless sirloin steak rather than separate it off. Time for some beef fillets, whole tenderloin. Just get this cut up into some nice 1.25 to 1.5 inch thick fillets. Beauties. Beef Thor's hammer. This has been an extremely popular cut last couple years for us. So where you just take that beef hind shank and you remove the top portion of the meat around this bone. Makes a fantastic long, low, and slow, you know, some tacos, like an ossobuco. It's got great flavoring. That all those tissues and those connective tissues in that meat that you see, those actually break down, and it's a very, very edible cut. There you have Beef Thor's hammer. Let's cut some caveman steaks. So in these cuts, I want to show you, you have top round, eye round, bottom round, round tip. And that right there is what we call beef caveman steaks. And what's left of this round, we're going to cut some jerky, and we're going to cut some stir fry, and we're going to cut a little piece of an eye round. So out of this portion that's left, we have top round, which is here, the eye round, the bottom round, and this portion right here is called the heel. So we'll just pull the heel out, and then we'll just find all of these seams. So there's your top round. This is your eye round, which we'll save this as a roast. So this is a eye round roast. And then the rest of this stuff we'll trim out for, as mentioned, some jerky. I'm just cutting some jerky out of these remaining pieces of this round. So we cut it into these slices so that we wind up with pieces where the grain's actually going across each individual piece of jerky. So it's just a good way to use up that top, bottom, and eye portion of that round that's left into jerky strips.
Meat and spices have gone together for centuries, and for several decades, the Bearded Butchers have been formulating spices in their butcher shop, and that's where we came up with our many different recipes that are specially formulated with no added chemical ingredients. They're all natural. They're perfectly paired with not only meat, but other types of food items that you know and love. You can find us not only online at beardedbutchers.com, but popping up in thousands of retailers all across the United States and even internationally.
So the grain-fed half is completely finished, front hind. Now we're on to the last remaining quarter, which is the grass-fed hind. We're just going to run through this real quick, pulling out similar, or if not the same, cuts that we did on the grain-fed. We're going to be cutting the caveman steaks, the Thor's hammers, you name it. And we're going to get this added to our table. Pulling the tri-tip out so we can cut those caveman steaks. The grass-fed tri-tip is significantly smaller than the grain-fed. So I pointed out on the grain-fed hind that big chunk of kidney suet, and you can see with this grass-fed, it's just, there's so much less. So when it comes to grass-fed fats and tallows and things like that, can be harder to obtain. And this is the reason why right here, is because compared to that massive chunk of grain-fed, that's all we have of the grass-fed. Thor's hammer and caveman's again. Pull this whole tender like the grain-fed half. So you will notice that we did, even though these beef were similar in weight, we used opposite sides. So that's why the cuts may look like they're being broken down differently at a different view, and it's because it's one side grain-fed and then one side of grass-fed. We chose opposite sides, that way you had the whole beef down on the table. There's the sirloin. There's a tenderloin for some fillets. There you have the strip section, sirloin, and the tenderloin. Now we just got to get them cut into some steaks. There's your grass-fed strip steaks. Grass-fed sirloins. Grass-fed fillets. Grass-fed Thor's hammer. Here's your grass-fed caveman steaks. And then with the remaining portion of these rounds, we're going to do the same thing that we did on the grain-fed. We're just going to cut some jerky, cut an eye around, and the rest will go into trimmings.
Wow, this looks great, Seth. So here's your overview. Over on this side, we have the grain-fed, and then on this side, we have the grass-fed. So as you recall, we started out with 339 pounds hot carcass hanging weight. That's the number that really matters. And then what we're left with from that hot carcass hanging weight is what you see in front of you, which is mostly boneless, closely hand trimmed, ready to pack or grind eating meat. Now inside your tape, you have all your steaks, your roasts, your cuts. The total on the grain-fed inside the tape is 126 pounds of cuts. On the outside of the tape, you have your trimmings right here. These are boneless and ready to grind. That's 94 pounds. So in total, you have 220 pounds of closely hand-trimmed, mostly boneless, eating meat, ready to package, put in your freezer. That's 64.8% of the hot carcass hanging weight. Now, typically, you're purchasing animals by that hot carcass hanging weight, sometimes live weight, but in this case, it's hot carcass hanging weight. And that can vary based on where you're at in the, geographically, what farming practice went put into it. So I'm using the average of the purchase price for the grain-fed carcass at $3.25 per pound times that hot carcass hanging weight of 339 pounds. So that's going to give us a total cost to acquire the carcass of $1,101.75. Now layer in the processing fees, which again can vary around the country, and I've just averaged them to $1.20 a pound times the hot carcass hanging weight, which includes the slaughter fee as well. You add those together. On your grain-fed, you're looking at a total of $1,508.55 for what you see on the table to put in your freezer. That's coming out to $6.85 a pound packaged price. So $6.85 a pound is your average package price for your grain-fed beef. Now, outside of what you see here, we have the trimming, the offal. So we have bones. We have pure fat that can be rendered down into tallow. We have scraps that aren't good for rendering. They're not good for pet food. Those go in the barrel. And then we have some stuff that we could grind into pet food. Your non-edibles, we'll call that on your grain-fed, 119 pounds. Now switching over to the grass-fed. Again, hot carcass hanging weight, the number that matters, 302 pounds. Purchase price, I'm going with $5 a pound on your grass-fed. But first, I'd like to tell you the total weight of the cuts inside the tape on your grass-fed is 111 pounds. So that's everything that's a steak, a roast, mostly boneless, closely hand-trimmed eating meat. Outside the tape, you have the trimmings ready to grind. On your grass-fed, it's 96 pounds. So that's a total of 207 pounds of mostly boneless, closely hand-trimmed, ready to package and put in your freezer meat on the grass-fed. That's a higher yield than we get on the grain-fed, as we expected. That's 68.5% yield. Even though we took that hit on the evaporation loss, we still made it up in the end with this higher yield. So this results in the pricing as we break it down. 302 pounds carcass hanging weight, $5 a pound. You paid $1,510 for this grass-fed half. You add in that $1.20 a pound in processing fees, you're looking at a total of $1,872.40 in the package or per pound price. $9.05. So you're going to see that premium that we talked about for grass-fed. Again, just a reminder, you get a better yield. It's a little more nutrient dense. That if you're into the healthier side of it, we often use the analogy, this is kind of like your olive oil. This is kind of like your butter. Then over here we have this sort of the same configuration of offal. We have the bones, of course, those can be put into a soup stock, something like that. We have much less fat on the grass-fed. We have a whole lug of it over there on the grain-fed, much less on the grass-fed. In fact, on those two in particular, we went from 40 pounds of tallow on the grain-fed down to just 7 pounds on the grass-fed. We've got the same type of scrap, and then we've got some for pet food. 81 pounds is what our total is there. So there's your breakdown by the numbers. 2025 refresher. Seth and I are going to now grab a steak, take it out to the grill it up for you quick, give our final thoughts on flavor, tenderness, and what this all means to you, the viewer.
Pretty cool video.
Very cool. Great
Next
job.
up, thanks, same to you. Let's light the grill. Let's cook a couple steaks. Grill's hot. Grain fed, going on the grill. Ribeye, grass fed, going on the grill. Also a ribeye. Let's get them cooked up. Grass-fed's finished. Keep in mind that these don't have any seasoning on them. We're going to try these just as they are. No seasonings. And the grain-fed is finished. So there you have grain-fed. There you have the grass-fed. Gonna let those rest for a minute. Slice them up. Get a taste. So I cooked them. Scott's gonna do the honors of slicing them up.
Let's see how we did here. Which one's which?
That's grass-fed.
That's grass-fed and that's grain-fed. Ooh, nice cooking job, Seth.
Thank you.
All right. So let's get a little slice here of each, right out of the center of the ribeye, and we can go on to the spinalis or whatever we want to make sense with later. Okay, so there's our grass-fed or grain-fed. There's our grass-fed.
Do grass-fed first?
Sure. Great beef.
Good flavor.
Big beefy flavor. Typically with grass-fed, you're going to get more of your mineral content, your vitamin content that's in there. You're going to taste as a flavor, which sometimes can be compared to, it's a bigger, beefier flavor, a richer flavor.
A little bit more irony.
Yeah. Some people would maybe even say it's gamey. I wasn't picking up so much of that, but you can definitely get it's just a richer flavor, typical of grass-fed beef. There's your buttery, smooth buttery steakhouse, mostly what you're used to. The big difference usually with the flavors comes when you actually get into the fat. Let's have a nice big hunk of fat right there and see what you think about the flavor of the fat. How about you take that one?
Don't
the
mind if I do.
Flavor of the fat. Typically in the grass-fed, the fat is in itself is what you get that little bit more of a gamey or a high flavor.
Now something I'm not picking up with that is that grassiness. I didn't notice it.
Not
with
so
that.
much, and then
not so much.
Over here in the grain-fed, you just get that more mellow flavor. Got some spinalis there.
That's my favorite
We
part.
can dip it in the bold, or we can dip it in the black.
I'm gonna go with bold.
Oh. Our seasonings. I know we say this all the time, but formulated for meat, not to overpower the flavor of the meat, just adds another essence to it, enhances the flavor. brings it up 20 notches.
So good. So this isn't really which one we prefer. This is just our opinion on how they taste. Grass-fed, if you're used to eating, you know, like your wild games and more of a natural way of eating, you're gonna lean towards the grass-fed beef. If you're more towards that, you know, like Scott mentioned, that steakhouse flavor, that buttery goodness, you're gonna lean towards the grain-fed. So they're both excellent. It just really depends on what you want out of a steak. Both of them are very, very good, even without any seasoning. Obviously, they're much better with the seasoning, in our opinion. But yeah, they're great.
Drop your opinion in the comments. Which one would you choose?
Yeah, we want to know.
Are you a health nut who wants a little bit more nutrient-dense beef, and you want to know a little bit more about how the foraging was done with the cattle, and perhaps you're more environmentally minded? Or are you just looking for a rich, juicy steak and you want a little lower price point? So those are both things that factor into it. We hope you enjoyed the video. We hope you came out of it a little more educated. We hope we could elevate the meat experience for you. And we want to encourage you to visit us at beardedbutchers.com. Check out all the stuff that we have regarding our website, and make sure that you're subscribed and you've got the bell turned on for notifications. You follow us here, and you follow us on whatever other platforms you're on.
This was a fantastic video, absolutely packed with information. If you could, share it with your family and friends. We want to educate the audience, because an educated audience makes a better consumer. So whether you're going into the grocery store, into a butcher shop, into a restaurant, this is going to make you a more educated person, and you're just going to enjoy the experience so much more. So hopefully you guys and gals enjoyed the video. Stay tuned for more, and until next time, see ya.